Did you wake up today with the insatiable desire to ruin the gameplay experience for every single high-tier premium pilot in War Thunder? If so, you found the right video. Skill issue guide, Mirage 2000C-S, let's get straight into it.
Just do it!
The Mirage 2000C-S series, I'm just going to call it the CS for simplicity's sake, is a French 12.3 fighter coming in two variants, the Tech Tree CS5 and the Event CS4, which, by the way, is available for a pretty reasonable price on the market at only like 30 Gaijin coin if you want to pick it up. The only difference between these two is that the CS5 gets a missile approach warning system and a good bit more countermeasures. They're otherwise pretty much identical as far as I'm aware. Now, I usually don't just announce my final verdict on these vehicles right off the bat, but I'll be honest with you guys, this is my favorite jet in all of War Thunder, and honestly, maybe even my favorite vehicle outright, though I'm not sure if I could really pick between this and the Diesel Tiger. And keep in mind, I don't just say that as someone who is an existing Mirage 2000 fanboy before I picked this up. I honestly had barely even had an understanding of what this thing was, other than it was just a Delta with a powerful engine. But the absolutely cracked flight model of this thing makes it just such a monster in dogfights that I honestly can't think of another aircraft I enjoy playing more. And to prove to you guys I'm not exaggerating with how much I'm hyping this thing up, the CS4 was what I used to grind out most of the French high-tier air tech tree, and out of 193 battles, I won 140 of them, and netted myself about a 5-to-1 kill-death ratio, so yeah, it's pretty good. Now, in the interest of transparency, I do have to add that it's not quite as absolutely dominant as it was back then, since now it gets up-tiered against stuff that have AMRAAMs and Fokker 90s, but even in up-tiers, it still feels like more of a
I'm not locked in here with you. You're locked in here with me.
sort of situation. Oh, and by the way, since only like 5 of you have seen it, I figured I'd mention that if you feel like scrolling down all the way to the bottom of my video feed and watching the first video I ever uploaded to this channel, about a third of that footage is just CS4 seal clubbing, so if you want to see more of that, that's where that is. Anyways, the reason this jet is so strong is that its BR is kept artificially low by the fact that on paper, this thing is a big step down from stuff like F-16s, MiG-29s, flankers, etc., but situationally, or in a 1v1, it's just as good, if not actually much stronger. Before I get into what makes this thing such a beast though, let me quickly just go over some of these drawbacks. First off, I'm not gonna lie to you guys, the stock grind is rough. You get magic 1s, which, being rear aspect only, is a bit underwhelming for this BR, and then you have the bane of my existence, the R530F. The R530F is not just a bad missile, it is literally worse than useless in my opinion. It only pulls 20 Gs, and since it operates off of pulse mode, it will have its lock broken if there's any chaff in the field of view of the missile, more or less. I literally only got 2 kills with this thing, and the entire time I was stock grinding my way up to the 530D, which I'll talk about in a minute, and both of them were flying in a straight line, not paying attention, and not deploying any countermeasures. I've had some of my subscribers tell me it works okay in their experience. I don't know what sort of blood sacrifice to the snail they must be doing in order to get these sorts of results, but my advice here is the same as in the Mirage F1 skill issue guide, which I'll link in the end screen. Just don't even bother bringing it. If you bring these along while you're stock grinding, all they're going to do is add a bunch of deadweight to your airframe, and I can promise you what's going to happen is you're going to die a bunch of times trying to set up what look like easy shots for pretty much any other BVR missile, but this thing will just not land you any kills. This pathetically underwhelming missile is further hindered by the only real built-in drawback of this aircraft, which is the radar only gets access to pulse Doppler head-on mode, which means that it can only really track targets moving towards you or away from you at extremely high speed, relative to the position of the radar. To be clear, that means that it isn't dependent on the actual airspeed of the target, but how fast it's moving relative to your own radar, which obviously is attached to your aircraft and therefore also moving. This is a pretty major drawback because it means that even with the 530Ds, which you unlock later, all someone has to do to avoid being hit is to turn away from you. They don't even have to properly notch. There is a tactic I employ to deal with this drawback, which I'll explain later in the video. So, given all that, what exactly does this vehicle have to offer which would make me not only overlook these deficiencies, but say it's my favorite jet in the game? Well, the number one reason is the airframe. This airframe is not just good, I think the only proper way to describe it is absolutely fucking cracked. It will easily hit Mach 1.2 on minimum afterburner on the deck, meanwhile it remains fully controllable down to like 150 miles an hour, that's like 240 kph for all you metric users. It also has surprisingly good energy retention for a delta wing aircraft, and remains highly controllable and responsive at most speeds unless you get like extremely fast. Essentially, if you merge with this aircraft and its pilot knows what they're doing, it doesn't matter what you're flying, you are fucked. Even F-16s, F-14s, flankers present very little challenge for this thing, and as for third gens like the Phantoms and MiG-23s, if you're flying one of those, your best course of action is to just run away and hope your teammates come to save you, because you're going to be lucky if you last 20 seconds against this thing in a proper dogfight. The main tactic I like to employ with this aircraft when I merge with someone, assuming there are no enemies around to third-party you, is to go vertical, cut the burner, drop the air brake because it's much more maneuverable at very low speeds, and then fire off a Magic 2 at them. In most cases, they won't have even gotten their nose around yet and will still be rear aspect to you, and probably will not even be 2 kilometers away even if they're flying the opposite direction, so this is going to end the fight instantaneously about 9 out of 10 times if you execute this correctly. And if you don't have any magics left after you merge, don't worry too much about it. I'll show you an example at the end of the video of a good dog fight that kind of represents what you want to be doing most of the time. I should mention, in most aircraft, I would not recommend using your air brake like this, the MiG-19 being one notable exception, but this thing just has such a ridiculous amount of thrust and accelerates so fast that you barely have to even pay attention to maintaining your energy unless you've more or less completely stalled yourself out. Now, this is all well and good for after you've merged, but as for your opening moves, this is one of the few aircraft I would actually recommend flying close to the ground and using multipathing to avoid the opening salvo of radar missiles. This thing is just so responsive at all speeds that it really isn't a problem to hug uneven or even forested ground, and while the airframe might look good for high altitude BVR on paper, it just doesn't really have the kit for it, as I'll explain. You see, the 530D, which is this thing's primary BVR armament, is a perfectly good missile, and notably it pulls extremely well with 30 Gs of maximum overload, but it just doesn't have the range of things like the AIM-7F or the R-27ER, which you're going to be seeing a lot of, let alone the Fox 3s you run to in an up tier. What I would recommend is using it to pop up and attack enemies who are coming down from high altitude, and rather importantly, not engage until they're within about 10 kilometers, thus ensuring the highest possible probability of the kill. You only get 2 of them, so making your shots count is quite important, and as I mentioned earlier, the fact you only have pulse Doppler head-on means that if you give the enemy enough time to even try to notch, it's probably going to miss, so make sure you get close. Also worth mentioning is that they have a very short minimum range, so don't hesitate to use them even if targets are closing in to within like 2 kilometers. Then you have the Magic 2s. I'm sure my existing audience knows how I feel about these, but for those of you who are new, I am an absolute simp for these things. Firing them rear aspect from within about 2 kilometers is usually guaranteed kill, both due to the IRCCM and how fast these things shoot off the rails, giving your enemies very little time to react and a very small chance of surviving. Once you're all out of missiles, you are by no means out of firepower though, as with over 15 kilograms of burst mass per second split between 2 belly-mounted 30mm cannons, anyone who gets into gun range is completely screwed. Granted, the velocity on these guns isn't the greatest, at only around 800 meters per second, but I find their position makes them very easy to aim, and if you're used to flying mid-tier jets like, say, the MiG-15 or the earlier French ones, this will be very recognizable and easy to use for you. And also, they get an excellent spread due to their position, and have a massive amount of HE filler in each shell, so these things are very reliable. Just make sure you use air target belts though, just to get as many of those APIT rounds out of the mix as possible. Anyways guys, before we wrap up, let me just quickly show you one good example of a gunfight 1v1 against an opponent who actually knows what they're doing. So here I'm closing in on an F-14 who I've spotted trying to land from a distance. I'm going to open up by trying to shoot him down with one of the R530s. He's going to be smart about that though, he's going to get towards the deck and multipath it. I'm going to try and swing around behind him, but here's where I make a mistake, which is I should have actually dropped my air brake here because this thing just has so much thrust and retains its energy so well that it can actually be hard to dump your speed. Meanwhile, he's going pretty slow, so he actually almost gets onto my 6, but I do manage to pop that air brake late. I'm going to circle down on top of him, try and do a hammerhead here, but he is in an F-14, he has a lot of thrust, and he's actually going to pull up over me. He is giving me a hard fight here, but this is where you see the strength of the Mirage 2000 really shine, which is that this thing will just hang in the air. I am down to like 150 miles an hour, and I am still just able to position my nose as I see it, and I'm going to take his tail off. And that really just shows the difference between this thing and all these other jets, which are very good at dogfighting, like the F-14, F-16, is even though it doesn't have that sort of like high-speed energy retention, that ability to just float in the air like a UFO, never really stall out, other planes just can't match that. Anyways, guys, that's going to be all for this one. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed this content. Check out my Mirage F1 skill issue guide linked in the end screen, and I'll see you guys in the next one.